Do you really want to ask that practitioner, why are you suggesting an induction at 36 weeks? Then write it down, take it into the office. So that way you remember, because when you wrote it down, you felt strong enough that you could ask that question and you felt so strongly that it needed an answer. Nothing has changed other than the fact that you're now sitting in front of that practitioner and you're not questioning their skill. You're not questioning what was their number in their graduating class. You're not questioning why did you buy that car. You're not making a value judgment of them. You are asking them how they are going to help you. And you're the only you've got.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. I'm excited today to welcome Nikki Helms. Nikki has been a friend and coworker for a long time. She used to teach with me when she was in midwifery school. Now she owns the only Black-owned birth center in San Diego. Nikki has been absolutely fantastic with my families and helping them understand the education piece to what their bodies are doing. And her birth center just does different things there. And so I wanted to highlight that today and let her tell us what her birth center is and what it does, and then also talk about co-care. Because I get a lot of questions with my families that are going to be birthing at a hospital but want co-care because they're not really sure what they're getting is the right information, and they want balanced information so that they can make different decisions. So welcome, Nikki. I'm glad you're here.
Good morning.
So tell me a little bit about San Diego Community Birth Center. What makes it different? We started it in 2020. We all helped with that. We were very excited it was going to be opening. So tell us a little bit about what makes your birth center so unique.
What makes us unique? Well, first of all, we're one of, 3 surviving birth centers in San Diego County. We lost one this year, and we will lose access to another one next year. So hopefully they'll be back online in 2026, but we don't know how this goes. So there are 2 other birth centers in the county currently. Mine is the only one that will take all forms of insurance, will take cash pay. And if you know me, anybody that asks, I will tell you that I would rather take goats and fresh fruits and vegetables for payment. Honestly, that doesn't get you very far in San Diego. So
no, goats don't. That's a bummer.
It is a bummer. I think what makes us or me different in this work is that we allot for time, and time is a precious thing. And when we allot for time in our appointments with our clients, that allots for more communication, more questions. It allots for the time to actually look up the answer. If we don't know the answer, let's look it up. We're all here together. Let's find out. And I don't think that's something that you get at other birth centers. I don't know. Again, I haven't worked at those other birth centers. But so the time that we allot to our families here to ask their questions and find answers, I think is hugely important. And I know for a fact that we do that differently than your medical care provider on the medical side.
I absolutely agree. And when people are coming to you for, I want to birth at your birth center, what do you offer as far as payment? My insurance is covering it. How is this getting reimbursed? Like, how does that process work at your birth center?
One of the best things and one of the worst things is the fact that it's just me and one other, my midwife friend, Ashley, who does births here at the birth center. So that's a good thing in so much as you always know who's going to be at your birth, right? It's going to be me and Ashley. Occasionally, we do have someone else step in as a birth assistant, but it's generally going to be her or me. And therefore, when you have insurance, it goes to me. I have a biller, we work it out. If you want to pay cash, you can pay cash here. It's a very short chain of command is what it turns into. And that turns out to be a benefit for most people also. And we do work with folks with regards to payment plans. If they want it, but they can't do it all at once, that's fine. We know that these sort of things happen. So If this is something financially you hadn't been planning on, we'll work with you as long as you stay in touch with me and let me know. I got a text from a client the other day that he said, I know I owe this money and I'm really sorry. And I'm like, that's okay, dude. Get your car fixed so that you can go to work and make that money, but pay me by the end of the month. So we
Yeah.
have to fold in the fact that we're human beings too. Human beings have transmissions that go out and flat tires and sudden trips to family that they have to make. That takes away from the financial plan for the rest of the birth. And that's okay. But please communicate with me that is happening because I've had it happen too many times. I've done too many births and care provision for free by accident
Right.
because people refused to pay me, people forgot to pay me, forgot. So I just ask that people communicate with me honestly and openly so that I can do my job and I can also plan for the financial future of the birth center because it has to continue.
Well, and you also have bills to pay. That's how that works, right?
That's
You
what I
can't
heard.
pay your bills in goats and chickens. I know, it's such a bummer. So tell me how co-care works at your center.
So, co care is something that a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to have at a birth center. You do not need to have an obstetrician, an OBGYN, because we do pretty much everything, the exact same tests that they do on the medical side. However, the way we do it is a little bit different. For instance, if you are planning on getting, let's say, your glucose tolerance test, which is the test for gestational diabetes, if you're planning on doing that with your medical care provider, your OB, then chances are that they're going to tell you to go and have this test. You show up at the lab at 7 a.m., you take the test, and then you go home and you probably grab something to eat on the way because you haven't eaten, right? But what we do is we're going to have a whole discussion with you about this is what we're testing, this is what we're testing for. This is what we're testing with. This is how we're going to test. This is the procedure we're going to use. We outline all of that for you before we introduce needle one into the situation. And so a lot more people feel better about that setup of the care than just go to the lab, show up, let them take your blood, and I'll call you if there's something wrong, right? Because this way, we're constantly communicating with people. We're constantly telling them this is what we do, this is what we're testing for, these are what the results were, and this is what this means. And I'm telling you all of that, whether everything is fine or not. I don't like the idea of waiting on pins and needles to find out if everything's okay. You
Right,
know,
because it sits in their brain and takes up way more occupancy than it needs to for a longer period of time when it's, yeah, everything was fine. But no one tells them that for 3 weeks where you can call them back 2 days.
right. And people have been waiting for test results from their OB. And I don't mind if people call me and say, hey, what were my test results? And, oh, okay, hold on, let me look it up. Because it's just me and one other person. So we're taking care of all of these people. But again, the chain of command is very short. So it doesn't take much to get me on the phone and ask a question because, again, it's just us. So a lot of those questions about test results and things like that can be found out from the midwife directly. That's another thing that's different is that people in a co-care relationship don't generally have direct access to their provider. When you're a birth center client, you have my phone number, which means at any given time, you can text me and ask me a question about what you're about to have for lunch. And if you want to know if it's okay, if you want to know the results of your last series of tests that we did, or sometimes I reach out to my clients too and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. How are you doing? You don't generally get that at a medical based care provider either because they don't have enough personal knowledge about you and your family and your situation to just check in and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. You're on my mind. I thought I'd say hi.
I think that intimacy and connection is one of the most important things when it comes to having that midwife on your team because the care is just different. And I understand OBs have a lot of medical debt. They've got big offices to run. It's a fast paced, we have to see 137 people today. I get part of the disconnect with that, but you don't necessarily get that with a midwife when you do co care. And one of the questions that I get besides I'm going to birth at the birth center, do I need to have an OB, is I'm actually birthing in the hospital, but what's coming down to me is so sterile, and I don't feel like that 4-minute appointment is enough. And I'm not seeing my OB. I'm actually seeing the nurse practitioner, or I'm seeing the medical assistant and the nurse practitioner for 5 seconds, and I'm not seeing my OB. So I have all these questions. I don't really know who's going to be delivering me. And so they come in to you for co-care. So what does that look like? Because I think I know what it looks like, but what does that look like to you when they're coming in with questions from, I'm going to be birthing at XYZ hospital. I want you as co-care. How do you do those appointments, and what does that look like?
Well, oftentimes people who choose to do co-care, they know something about themselves that informs that decision, right? And that's fine. Everybody has their own series of decision-making prompts that they go through. So if someone is not hearing things on the one hand and they're hearing something else that contradicts that from their OB, and then that comes to the midwife, and the midwife says, okay, well, what did they say? And they say, oh, well, they said that I have to have a 36-week cervical exam. I said, okay, all right. So your OB is telling you have to have a 36-week cervical exam. Did your OB tell you why? No,
Nope.
actually, they just said it's just standard. It's just what they do. Okay, but it may be standard, but still, you get to ask why. Because you, my dear, are not standard. You are a unique individual. And therefore, you get to ask why they want to do that to your body because you still have the ability to keep everything to yourself. You have a personalization of this, but you also have some control over the situation. And a lot of times people forget that part.
I'm glad you brought up the 36-week exam, because that is one of my pet peeves as an educator, one of my pet peeves as a doula. Why are we doing 36, 37, 38, 39-week cervical exams in an office? So let's just talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. And I think that there's a modicum of fear that runs through pregnancy and the care providers that are giving it. There's a modicum of fear. There's a very strong undercurrent and it just keeps happening. And so that said, people are hesitant to ask questions of their doctors. Maybe it was the way we were raised, maybe it's a cultural thing that you don't question the doctor. Midwives, on the other hand, right? Okay, let's back up. So your doctor is telling you that they're going to do a 36-week cervical exam, right? Now, I don't know how many, well, I'm assuming that your listeners know cervical exams are uncomfortable. Nobody is hopping up on the table going, woohoo, let's do a cervical exam. Yes.
Nope.
No, it is, it's not great, right? The structures that we have to be able to find in your body, we got to kind of work with it. So it's a little much. The reason why we do cervical exams in labor is to mark your progress, right? We want to know at 8 o'clock in the morning, she was 6 centimeters, and at noon, she was 7 centimeters, or whatever, right? So the cervical exam is giving us useful information that we can then go back and chart, or we can go back and say, okay, let's try this spinning babies exercise. We can take that cervical exam measurement and do something with it in the birth, right? The actual active birth. However, at 36 weeks, there is nothing beneficial that they will find for you.
I hope they can't even find your cervix at 36 weeks. I hope it's tucked up so far behind that baby, because you're up to 6 weeks early for that baby to even show up. So what the heck?
Right. And people think, oh, I went to a doctor, I got my 36-week cervical check, and I'm 3 centimeters dilated. Okay, well, good for you. Honestly, it's not a harbinger for what's coming next, right? The 36-week cervical exam, you can have a 3 centimeter dilation at 36 weeks, and it can stay 3 centimeters for the next 4 weeks. Or you can have a 36-week cervical exam, and your cervix is high, hard, and closed, and you can have a baby in the morning. So there is no logic that I know of that makes sense to subject you to further infection risk, right? Because we want to keep your infection risk down. So again, there's no reason to subject you to that additional risk without the possibility of gaining information that will be helpful to us. At 36 weeks, that you're 3 centimeters dilated isn't helpful to anybody.
And you're not at that point making a decision for anything, right? Even when I was pregnant, almost 17 years ago, I had moved to a birth center. No one was checking me because I was at the birth center. And my friends that were going to the hospital every single week were getting these numbers and calling me and saying, "You're not getting good care. What are they doing to you?"
Nothing, which is great.
Right. And when I went, I didn't know. And I was still a new mom. I didn't really understand cervix and uterus and what was going on. And when I went to Roberta, the long term midwife that she's been there forever, she said, "Why are they getting checked? They're getting checked for induction. We're not going to induce you." And I was like, "I'm not getting induced." She's like, "Right. So why am I checking?" Just like you said, high, hard, and clear in the back, not doing anything. You could have a baby in 8 hours. 4 centimeters, soft and gushy. You'll have a baby in 3 weeks. Like, it's not a predictor, like the crystal ball metaphor we have. Your cervix is not a crystal ball. It's just part of your body doing its job when it decides to do its job. And if you're not making any decisions, like you said, in active labor, and here's the cervical exam because we're like, oh, we could do this maneuver and help get baby in a better alignment, whatever, that's using that information as a practical tool. Other than that, we don't need to know. A lot of people go through a whole labor with 0 cervical exams and the baby comes out the other end. Because what did we do 400 years ago?
I mean, even if you did a 36-week cervical exam 400 years ago, same thing. There's nothing that you can do at 36 weeks by checking a cervix that is going to make a difference unless you're going to induce someone.
And I find that's when you talk about a modicum of fear, and we talk about this in hypnobirthing, once they get that 36-week check and nothing's going on because it shouldn't be, then at 37 weeks, nothing's going on because it shouldn't be. But now you've got 2 weeks of you thinking your body's a failure and somebody giving you a pretty evasive, uncomfortable exam with a kind of sad look on their face, like, God, I wish your body would do something. 38 weeks, same thing. So you've got 3 or 4 weeks of lack of trust, lack of trust, lack of trust. And the medical professional putting it in my head, God, I really hope something's going to happen. Otherwise, we're going to have to get you going into labor because it just might not happen for you. And when you don't have the education and the trust built into your body and you believe that and you don't know what induction entails, we're on a roller coaster that you couldn't even have prepared for.
And you can't get off of. Yeah, you can't get off. When you're on, you're on. But it's true. More to your point, you've got 2 or 3 weeks of your body's not doing what it's supposed to do or what I expect it to do. And no one is treating you like an individual, right? No one is treating you as though, well, your body is doing this right now. Okay, cool. Her body is doing something else. That's cool too. So the medical system will work on averages and it works on a big swath of people that they've talked to. I'm worried about you as the individual. When people say, oh, I tell them the blood pressure was 110/70. Oh, is that good? My response is always, well, what is it for you? What is the blood pressure for you? Because that's what's more important. Good versus bad, it's more important that you have that individualized acknowledgement of this is what my blood pressure is and it's fine because it's like it always is for me versus any other 30-year-old woman with 2 kids and a job and a husband and all of that. Maybe her blood pressure is different, but the uniqueness of your makeup is what makes it different.
And I'm glad you brought blood pressure up because that is another one that once they get one high read, when look at the factors. She was rushing from the parking lot. She was late from work, getting to her appointment, whatever, all of those things. She's running up the stairs because the elevator was taking too long, sits down, gets her blood pressure read, right? She's exhausted, probably dehydrated because she's been running around. That blood pressure now dictates what's happening in that appointment. Instead
Right.
of, were you rushing to get here today? Blah, blah, blah. We have the appointment and then taking another one at the end when it might be in a normal range, right? But now we've got that high blood pressure. And so the majority of that appointment was talking about, wow, we really have to watch this, blah, blah, blah. And now that's in her head. And then she comes to class in a freak out and without the balance of co-care for me to say, well, go talk to your midwife about that. they're limited to that information they had. And now they're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get risk out of the birth center, or now I'm going to have preeclampsia because they went over all of that. And it's not tailored to the individual and what those circumstances were at that time, where we could do another read. And that's what I've experienced with the midwives. Then we'll do another read at the end, or we don't even do it until the end of that conversation.
Yeah, and it's very, very often that is exactly why blood pressures are high, because Shorty didn't want to get out of the car. I got to get into this appointment. I can't find parking. I missed another day of work. All of those factors all add up to make their appearance in your blood pressure readings. So here at the birth center, we take it when they get in. We get folks laid down. We get you all comfortable, and we'll take it then. And if it's high, then I'm gonna go get you a glass of water. I'm gonna get you a snack, hang out with you, chat a little bit, have more of your appointment, and then we're gonna talk about blood pressure at the end, or at least later on in the appointment, because we have to acknowledge that you were doing something that affected your blood pressure in a possibly negative way because of your anxiousness to get here. And I really appreciate it when people arrive on time. That's great. But sometimes you're running late and there's nothing you can do about that. And I shouldn't be taking your blood pressure when you're running in off the street because you couldn't find parking. I should wait. And most people in the midwifery community will do that and acknowledge that that happens.
I think the communication between the medical model and the midwifery model is so drastically different. And it's one of those things that one instills a trust in your body and your system and your intuition and knowing who you are so that you can bring that to the table instead of, here are our averages, here's what I'm seeing, you're not falling into those. And I even find that culturally, like I'll have an Indian mom who they typically have smaller babies, but they're in a totally different category because a lot of the information that we're getting those averages from are big fat white Caucasian babies. So of course, culturally, your baby may be smaller, right? But they're hearing the whole time, my baby's too small, my baby's too small. When they're having the perfect size baby for themselves. And if we were in India, it might be a totally different story because they're used
Hmm.
to the cultural norm of how those babies are in their country. And
Hmm.
that's been a big thing for certain cultures in America, trying to get the cultural competency of what. Can you talk to that a little bit? Because I know you do teach cultural competency classes with midwifery students and stuff like that.
I have in the past, and I've started to lean towards the phrase cultural congruency
Mm,
because we don't ever really become competent in someone else's culture, right? Competency means that you can move in and out of the culture and flawlessly execute the things that need to be done. Cultural congruency means that I can come to you as a member of someone of a different culture and stand next to you and see what you do and say, okay, do you want me to do that for you too? Okay, great, we'll do that. Cultural congruency is more like this versus competency, which you expect to be like this. I know what to do. This is more of a truthful place to be because I don't always know what to do, but I know that what needs to be done is to be respected and that you can instruct me and I will do what you ask me to do. So the cultural piece of it is very important. But I want to stress that I don't think it's possible that someone can be culturally competent, but you can be culturally congruent and you can be culturally respectful with regards to smaller babies and measuring of babies and cultural differences. I had an African American client, and she came to me with her first pregnancy, and she had been told that her baby was small. When you said that, that kind of made that memory pop up. And so she said to me, she said, Nikki, I got to tell you, I don't believe that there's anything wrong with this baby. Why do they want to induce me to get a small baby in its most beneficial growth environment? Why do you want to get a small baby out of the body and then do what? Are you going to stick it in the NICU? You're going to stick it full of tubes and all of this other stuff, which just shows that they do have your best interest at heart. However, the crux of the issue is the fact that this woman knew for a fact she was a small baby, her mother was a small baby, her grandmother was a small baby. So, what does that tell us, right? What does that tell us? What do we take into our calculations from this woman's history? Her family history is that they have small babies. That's it. It's so simple. They have small babies. And so she told me that. I said, okay. And so we factored that in. And so every time she went to her care providers and they told her, oh, I don't know, your baby's really small. We might have to induce. And she said, okay. And came to the birth center. So I trusted her body and I trusted the information she gave me about her family. And that is important too. And again, that's another place where I think the medical model falls down is that there are a lot of providers that don't get that background information, or they don't think it's important, or they don't necessarily see a correlation with your mother having a small baby and you being a small baby. Therefore, maybe you're going to carry a small baby. They don't necessarily see that correlation. And that's not bad. It's just a different perspective. And how is that different perspective then going to affect you and your care and how you feel about yourself? Do you start to think, oh, I can't grow a baby in the appropriate size? Or do you start to think, well, this is just what my mother did and my grandmother did because they all had small babies and that's just what happened?
Oh, and you've got to trust that.
Yeah. And I can safely say that she was in co care. She was seeing her medical care provider. And they just kept telling her, we're going to have to induce you. We have to induce you at 36 weeks because this baby is too small. She had a baby at 39 weeks that was 7 pounds and she was just fine.
Perfect
No problem.
size.
Perfect size for her, right? She was like, why is this baby so big? And I'm like, big? All right. It's really hard to find the logic in why people are pushed to the brink of fear because of the fact that other people don't have enough information and other people don't ask for it.
Well, I don't think they're taught to ask for it. Are they? In medical school, it's here are the averages, here's our box that we stay in. To extend out from that shows what if I'm liable for something? And I get it because they're sued for everything. I understand that. It's just different in midwifery care. And I've had the same thing with a mom who her baby was breech and the pressure to have a cesarean and schedule. And she said, no, I was breech. My mom was breech. My grandma was breech. We turned during labor and they laughed at her, literally. And she said, I'm not scheduling a C-section. This is what we do in our family. And they would just give her a different OB that would come in and try and talk her out of it and saying, you don't understand. Nobody's here equipped to do breech. It's not going to be safe. And she's like, I'm not having a breech baby. She finally had to advocate enough that she said, when I go into labor, I will show up. You can do an ultrasound. If my baby is breech, we will go right back. If not, I'm going home, I'm laboring, and then I'm coming back. And that was the middle ground that they finally found. And sure as shit, she came in, they did an ultrasound, baby was head down. She went home, not even 2 hours, and she was calling me like, we got to go. And I met him at the hospital and she had a baby in 20 minutes. So she knew for her. And then I got the coolest picture of her baby, her mom, and her grandma all together. And she's like, here are my generations of breechness. And I was like, that's
Such
so great.
breachness.
But she really had to advocate for that and be like, this is our norm. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They're scared to do that. Or they just think, well, they're not going to listen to me. They know best. And
Right.
that's part of the good thing about having co-care and the midwifery model is intuitively, it is meant to drive you back to your intuition and what's right for
Yes.
you and what feels good in your body. Because I find that whoever's pregnant has a really good spidey sense for something is not right. And they bark and bark and bark until they figure that out. Or everything is fine. Why are you making me question it?
Right. Yeah. Did we even consider the fact that possibly there is nothing at all wrong with this? So this same woman came back a second time and had a second baby with me. Same setup. It went the very same way. Again, her medical model care providers were saying they need to induce her. And oh my gosh, your baby's so small. She had an 8 pounder at 41 weeks and 6 days. She
So
had
she even went longer
mhm,
and had a heavier baby.
she just smiled and nodded at her OB because she was active duty. So she had to go to these kind of bullshit appointments where she had to just show up and smile and nod because she didn't want to get in trouble with her job. Right.
Get it?
So
Yep.
So she went in and she smiled and nodded and said, okay, sure, yep, no problem. And then when she went into labor, instead of going to see them, came here, pushed out a baby, went home. And they're an amazing family. I also credit her because she trusted her body. She knows her history and she knew what they were telling her was not accurate. And she stepped outside of that norm and went to look for answers for herself and for her family. And I was happy, so happy to be able to help her find those answers and help her to trust what she felt in her heart and her body already.
So, yeah, let's talk about that. If they are in a medical situation that feels overwhelming every time they go, they're anxious, they're nervous, what they're hearing scares the heck out of them. When they go to co-care, what are midwives doing to chill that out and getting them to center and focus on what they're feeling inside? Are you feeling anxious because, or do you feel this way? Because that trusting the intuition piece, you're totally going to need during parenting. And maybe you guys are trained this way. How are you structuring those conversations to get us to come back to our autonomy that we should already have?
Well, and I say we because I'm painting everybody with a broad brush. I think that one of the things that midwives do best is almost like a gentle investigation. Well, why is that? We don't necessarily put the onus on you to predict or perform, but we do ask you for a little bit of a more in-depth reflection as to your answer to that question. So, for instance, with this particular woman, when she came in and she was saying, they're telling me my baby's small and I don't think there's anything wrong with my baby. I said, oh, yeah? She said, yeah, because they're giving me this list of stuff and everything's normal. And they're giving me this other list of stuff and this everything's normal. So why are they telling me that? And I said, why do you think they're telling you that? And it's active listening, really, is what it is. We hear what you're saying and we ask you the same thing you're asking us, but we perspective. Why are you feeling this way? And you have to then look at the man in the mirror and say, well, I don't know. Let me think about that for a minute. And I got time. I got time for you to think about that. You come back from your next appointment and have an answer then. But if you don't trust the process, then I'm going to ask you questions and I'm going to just ask you about yourself, your experience, your background, you as an individual. How does that work for you? What do you do that makes it so that you're now more concerned about this? I'm going to ask those kind of active listening questions. What I hear you saying is that you're scared that your doctor is going to induce you. Where did you lose your autonomy in this process? Why do you think that somebody's going to make you do something when literally it is physically impossible for them to come get you?
No induction police.
The induction police do not exist, right? So you make that induction appointment and you just don't go. You make the appointment to get them off your back. That's totally fine and valid because, again, if you are having a baby in a hospital and you missed your induction appointment, guess what? When you go into labor, they're not going to turn you away. They're not.
Nope, they can't. They can't abandon your care.
They can't do that. They can't. And so you can go in when you want. And there's nothing wrong with going in active labor because who wants to be induced? And people should really talk more about what an induction entails as well, because it's not something that's just like a yippee skippy yay, let's just go in here and do this kind of thing. It's not like getting a pedicure. An induction is forcibly getting your body to do something that at that juncture there it's not ready or willing to do, because otherwise it would have done it already, right? But if your body is not willing or ready to be in labor at 39 weeks, then your OB is pushing you towards that edge, and then labor is the cliff.
That's the whole reason that we created the induction class, because it is so casually brought up and everybody is offered it.
Mhm.
Everybody is offered it, and it's seeds are dropped all along the way. And so even parents that are coming into class are like, well, yeah, I want to do a natural birth, but my doctor said I might be induced because this happened at 20 weeks or whatever. And those seeds have been dropped the whole time. So in the back of their mind, they're thinking, well, I'll probably be induced, even though I would like a natural birth or to get my epidural at the very end or whatever, but I will probably be induced because they don't know anything about it. And they literally think it's a 9 to 5 process. I'll show up at 9 in the morning. I'll have a baby by 5, because they don't have time to explain to you what an induction is, how it's going to work, how fast paced it is, and that if your baby doesn't tolerate it well, we're now going into a cesarean. If you don't tolerate it well, we're now going into a cesarean. And you may not have been the perfect candidate for it, except that the seeds were placed so much that you just thought, I'm broken and I'm not going into labor. They know best. And we lose
Mhm.
that autonomy at every one of those seeds where we just didn't think to ask a question and do more research or get education on the outside. That autonomy just slips away little by little. And so by the end, we just are like, I want a healthy mom, healthy baby, because my doc has said that 65 times. And
Yeah.
if I make a choice that's different than that, I'm going to compromise healthy mom, healthy baby.
Right. And that's my objective too, though. My objective is healthy mom, healthy baby, and safe mom, safe baby. Right. And so our objectives are the same. The way we get there is different, but our objectives are the same. So I don't want anybody to get the notion that midwives don't like hospitals or midwives think doctors are full of crap, because we don't think that. We really don't. We think that doctors are trained as surgeons. So that's one thing. And a lot of people don't necessarily remember that, right? Your obstetrician slash gynecologist went to medical school, and in medical school, that particular practitioner learned to be a surgeon. That is the majority of their training. So why is it that people are surprised that you want to do what you were trained to do, which is surgery on people, right? It's not their fault. Their perspective is that, oh, there is a much simpler way to get through this. All you need to do is surgery. And again, like I said, I love doctors. I had 2 cesareans myself. I love doctors. I love hospitals. I think they're amazing when we need them. However, in the situation of people wanting to have natural birth, we don't necessarily need them to be in a hospital to have a natural birth. So I encourage people, especially people who are in co care, I encourage people to come up with a list of questions. And that way, go to your care provider with your list of questions prepared so that you don't have to feel like you have to come up with something right now because you've got that provider's attention for 30 seconds and go. Oh, I was going to ask. And no, see, that doesn't work because pregnancy brain, one, is a thing. And two, you don't necessarily produce quality results under pressure, right? So you're not coming up with the questions you really want to have answered instead of just like, do you validate parking? It's like, let's get down to the nitty gritty of what you really want to have answered. Do you really want to ask that practitioner, why are you suggesting an induction at 36 weeks? Then write it down, take it into the office. So that way you remember, because when you wrote it down, you felt strong enough that you could ask that question and you felt so strongly that it needed an answer. Nothing has changed other than the fact that you're now sitting in front of that practitioner and you're not questioning their skill. You're not questioning what was their number in their graduating class. You're not questioning why did you buy that car. You're not making a value judgment of them. You are asking them how they are going to help you. And you're the only you've got.
You're the one that goes home with your body, your baby, and the results of whatever decisions you're allowing to be made, either that you're making or that you're turning over.
Right. And if they're making the decisions on your behalf, then you're not making a decision.
Because that has consequences too.
Mhm. So my favorite Rush lyric is, even if you choose not to decide, you've still made a choice.
Yeah, that should be a t-shirt.
Yeah, not deciding is a choice. I don't know logically what a lot of the reasons are that people push for an induction at 38 or 39 weeks. There was a paper that came out from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or ACOG. There was a paper that came out from ACOG in 2000 and
Was it 16?
15, 16, something like that, that recommended induction at 39 weeks. Now, that was almost 10 years ago. Now, we're on the heavy side of 10 years ago, and people still use that as what they're referring to for what informs their choices. Right. And again, ask more questions. And if that practitioner gets annoyed with you, or heaven forbid, they drop your care, guess what? You didn't need to be with that person with that care. Because if they're willing to drop you and feel like they were being challenged in their knowledge, and that's why they're dropping you, there's something bigger afoot there. And you dodged a bullet and yeah, go ahead, fire me. That's fine.
Well, and we know that the Arrive trial had so many flaws in it. And I have watched steadily the cesareans increase with that. And just from practicality of my students, practicality of the community, it's drastically different because inductions become the norm. It used to be, hey, we're really seeing some medical evidence. And now it's just everybody, like people expect it. And I'm finding with my students who are like, well, if I don't go to labor by 40 weeks, then they don't let me go past 41 and 5 or 40 and 5. And I'm like, they don't let you go? Do you hear that? They'll hear that verbiage, let
Yeah,
you? Like, or if I don't go into labor by 40 weeks, your kid doesn't have a calendar. Your kid's still growing a brain and working on those lungs. Your kid doesn't know that there's a deadline, right? What have we done for the last eons of time? We just had a baby in early spring. There was no 40-week due date.
I would love to be able to do that. I want to tell somebody, you're due in the fall. See you when I see you.
Isn't that fantastic? And you just grow and come to appointments. Yeah, we've gotten so far away from nature and what has been normal in the past, but now has become normalized. And that care is not always in our best interest or the best interest of our babies. And that's what we need to wrap our head around with the autonomy and also common sense and not turning over our power to a white coat that has a degree. Awesome.
Right.
But they don't know you the way you know you.
Yeah. And I also have to add on that everything that you see on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook is not necessarily the best thing for you. And when we were talking about doing this, I mentioned perineal massage, right? And we talked about perineal massage and how many people get told to do perineal massage. And I talked to a lady last week. She saw it on TikTok. One lady learned about it from her public health nurse. Oh, yeah, perineal massage. Why on earth? Why? And again, I ask the people who are asking me, I ask them, why do you think that that is a thing that somebody would do? And then I go ahead and I go further into the questioning and say, okay, well, if perineal massage is supposed to help you at birth, why are you doing it at 36 weeks? You're not in labor, you're not getting ready to have a baby. So why are we doing it now? I mean, if you want to do it, you can do it. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. But why? When have you ever stretched tissue that belongs to you that stays stretched?
Are you just going to have this gaping vagina because you've been stretching it, a big floppy
Ooh,
vagina?
yeah.
Because, yeah,
No, and the perineum, that's the thing, is like the perineum isn't the vagina. It's a whole other section. The vagina is connected to it, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about in the vagina. We're talking about the tissue outside the vagina that is specifically designed and responds incredibly well to the pressure of a baby's head from the inside. So, why, again, are we sticking our hands in there trying to manipulate things when it just isn't going to be effective? And we don't trust ourselves. That's the issue. We don't trust ourselves. We're afraid to question authority because we feel like this authority is going to negatively impact my experience in some way. And that's a very real concern, very real fear that the challenging of authority is going to affect my experience in a negative way. And have I made a mistake? Right? Have I made a mistake by not listening to what this person in a white coat with a college degree is telling me? Have I made a mistake if I question that? The answer is no. You never make a mistake when you're asking questions because they're just that. They are questions that deserve answers. Now, what you choose to do with that answer and that information is completely up to you, but you have a right to it. You have a right to the information, especially when it comes to dealing with things that are going to affect your body and your internal structures personally, right? You are allowed to ask the questions of anybody. If it's the nurse that came in and just fresh out of nursing school, if it's Doogie Howser, MD, midwives don't know everything. We don't. So you got to get your own answers. You got to do your research. And it's okay not to put your full trust in a provider. Midwife, doctor, doesn't matter. It's okay to not put your full trust in there, but you've got to have enough trust to make it such that I can do my job, you can do your job, which is birthing this baby. And it won't be without fear. There's always a little bit of fear involved. And I always tell my clients that if they are not feeling a little bit of fear, then they may not be paying attention to what they're about to get into, right? So there's always a little bit of that, but the way you handle it is up to you.
And I want to stop right there. I think that's the perfect ending. Thank you for being here today, Nikki. You can find Nikki at San Diego Community Birth Center. She's online. She's on TikTok, I believe, and Instagram.
No, but it's coming. Instagram for sure. Facebook for sure. TikTok is coming. I think I actually might even start that today. Look out, world.
Fantastic. And yeah, because Nikki's got air conditioning at the birth center. And so if you hear a little humming in the background, and I heard your dog a couple times too, because our dogs need the air. So both of us have our air conditioning on today because we were melting. So if that's what you heard, that's what you heard. Thank you for being here, Nikki. And we will see everybody next week. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.